Hello, EnderSword here again, this time with a replay from the Bronze League. This was suggested to me by lyandr. He sent me a PM on Team Liquid to look at his thread on the strategy forums where he had about 10 replays posted. So I took one that does fit within the time constraints that I have on YouTube. For anyone sending them in, try and keep them under 20 minutes of game time, or else I have to kind of accelerate through part of the game since I am still limited to 15 minutes on for a YouTube video, and I don't really want to make them multiple parts at this point, so anything under 20 minutes is good. But back to this one, we will be looking obviously at the Terran player lyandr today, and his opponent is going to be Dodge, the Protoss player over here on our left hand side. The three things that I'm going to focus on in this game are, number one, the transitions. So the idea of moving from one tech to the other, one type of attack to the other during the game, and making sure that those flow together nicely. Much too often people simply launch an attack, and then if it fails, they then consider switching to something else. You want to always try and have a natural follow-up to what you're doing before that attack goes. You don't just assume that each attack is going to win the game. Always have some sort of backup to what you're trying to do. Second thing we're going to look at is just some very basic micro. There's some large errors that you can try and avoid in the game that you don't want to be doing repeatedly, because you're just going to putting yourself at a massive disadvantage. And the third thing we're going to be looking at is production. As your economy gets better throughout the course of the game, you need to be adding production facilities so that you can actually use the money available to you. A lot of people will make their initial production and then not improve it as their economy gets better and they continue to produce more workers and more expansions. There's no point in taking an expansion or adding a bunch of workers if you're not then going to ramp up the capacity that you have to spend the money coming into you. So you have to plan that ahead and make sure that you can continue producing. So we see here lyandr did get a scout of the Protoss base. He's vaguely aware of what's going on here. There is a gateway. He's got an interesting patrol point set, just 2 points. So each time he turns around, a probe is able to take a whack at him. If you're going to do patrols, and very often I set manual waypoints, and you'll see a lot of the pro players set a manual path throughout the base. But if you're going to use waypoints, at least make it something circular, triangular, something as opposed to just a straight line back and forth. You can do that by shift-clicking and patrolling around different points, and it will then do all of them. You don't want it on a back and forth path, or you're just going to get picked off by a probe or the first zealot out or something. You want to try and keep that alive as long as possible. And since the Protoss player here went for 2 zealots first, that SCV could still be alive and still looking around and still know exactly what was going on. So you want to keep those scouts alive as long as possible, and you'll know if anything tricky is happening or really just what's going on in the base. We're going for a 3 barracks opening here down at the Terran base. That usually indicates something quite aggressive is going to happen, and that is lyandr's plan during this game. He's going for the early stim tech to make sure that he's got that during an attack. And you can see that he's just operating off 1 gas, which is basically what he needs to get the add-ons up and be able to produce some marauders and things like that. He's not opting for anything gas-heavy at this point in the game. Also doing a reasonably good job at keeping ahead of his supply. He knows that these are going to come online in terms of production capacity, so he's making sure that supply depots are going down, and he's not going to supply block himself while trying to pump this army out. That's a good thing, and a lot of players do neglect that. They'll start the barracks, they'll get them up and running, and everything's good to go, but they've supply blocked themselves and then have to build those depots. He is trying to stay ahead of that as he goes throughout this game, and making sure that that capacity is available to him. It's also starting the concussive shell technology, and everything about this is indicating to me that there is a timing attack that he's looking to make. He's planning on moving out with his army fairly shortly and launching an attack on his enemy's base. It may make some sense at this point to do a little bit of secondary scouting, whether it was scanning his enemy's base or simply sending another SCV or a Marine up towards the front to take a look at what his opponent actually has in order to gauge the success of this attack before it actually launches. Instead, he kind of blindly pushes out without really knowing what's going to be here. He doesn't know if there's an expansion down. He doesn't know what type of army is there, if there are mortals out, anything like that before going into this. So it's often good to have that information prior to just poking yourself and your whole army up a ramp, as he plans on doing. But more important than that, probably in this case, is that there's no transition back at home. We've got 30 SCVs, and we're now pulling in tons of money. But this attack is then thwarted by a single force field. But back home, we're just same thing. 3 barracks are going on, and there's no addition of a second gas. There's no factory going down. There's no starport going down. As soon as he went into attack mode, all of a sudden we've lost that depot making. We're now supply blocked. He starts to make a barracks and instantly cancels it. I'm not entirely sure why. But all of a sudden, all those good mechanics that were there originally have fallen apart. He's going for an expansion behind this. He certainly knows that he can't be attacked, so that's somewhat of good instinct, but he's still not progressing on what his technology is going to be, what his new army composition is going to be. This has been thwarted. This is going to be something that can be held off by a force field or two, and it's not going to be able to get up there. Now, in this case, that scan should have revealed that there's only one sentry, so he could actually come up there after that force field wears out, but there's a lot of zealots. It's actually pretty dangerous to come up here with this army, especially given that they're a little hurt. So what are we going to move into? And at the 10-minute and 30-second mark of this game, there's no transition yet, and that's ultimately what cost him. He's way ahead in economy. He's way ahead in supply. He's getting an expansion while completely denying his opponent from getting one. Everything about this position is very dominant right now. The thing that is preventing him from going further is that this is really late, and that there's no transition to gas. There's no more tech being added on. So while the Protoss is being held to one base economy, he's teching behind it and getting out a force that's capable of launching this attack. The Terran player then doesn't micro very well. I'll take another look at this battle after we see it play out and note a couple of the issues that may be happening here. Just to rewind that about, I guess, 20 seconds, and I'll take a look at that a little bit slower. So this attack happens and zealots come in. His instinct is to stem up and try and target down the Colossus, but the zealots were doing way more damage than the Colossus was going to do, and he runs directly into them. Not only does he run directly into them, but he stems directly into them. So he takes 10 hit points of voluntary damage on his already damaged army, then charges forward into the exact unit that was doing the most amount of damage to him in order to pick off the Colossus. You tend to want to be kiting back. With the concussive shells, you can continue to kite the zealots so that they never actually get in contact with your marauders or your marines. Just be pulling your army back, stop, fire, pull your army back, stop, fire, pull your army back, stop, and fire. By voluntarily stemming and by going directly into them, he ended up a little worse than he could have been. If you're going to stem in that case, since the army coming down the ramp should be clearly too powerful for you, stem and run completely home. Don't even try and engage it. He can actually just run away from that army and get it all the way home, and then defend and attack back here where a second half of your army is. There's no point in engaging with half of your force and getting them completely taken out without doing really much damage at all. All he really got was that one Colossus, and that's not a good trade at all to be making. Protoss does come down, puts in his proxy pylon, but again, everything about this is actually fairly all-in-ish at this point. There's not a lot of mining to be done left at home. He's less than a third of his original mining left in the main base, and if this attack doesn't work right here, then he's in a lot of trouble. But we just don't have anything going on in the Terran base in time. He hasn't been able to transition to anything and get this reactor up in time, so there's no medevacs, there's no Vikings to deal with the Colossus. Again, we get him stimming and running into the Zealots and just getting his force absolutely picked apart here. So we get the early lead held by Terran, turning into an absolute defeat at the hand of just a simple, pretty standard Protoss army that could have been anticipated the entire way. He has that second base up because there's no additional production coming out. He never gets any benefit out of it. So while it's a 2-base Terran against a 1-base Protoss, they might as well have both been on 1 base because the Protoss player actually has way more production. He's got 4 gateways and a robo bay versus what was functionally 3 barracks, because the starport and factory didn't come. That's the first unit to come out of there, and the starport hasn't made anything the entire game. So it's really that, keeping the production, scaling with the economy that you're actually creating, not engaging in really bad spots, and don't push your army into something that is going to kill it. I know that the Colossus seems like the big threat, but the Zealots were the big threat there. And by engaging in that way, he put himself at a big disadvantage. So it's really those things. Keep your production up. Make sure that you're transitioning from one thing to another before you need to. So don't let your attack fail and then decide, I'm going to add some medevacs. I'm going to add some Vikings or whatever you were going to add. And make sure that you're microing at least a little and doing in the right direction. It's one thing to just move and not micro at all. It's another to micro to your own detriment, and that's kind of what we saw in this game. So I hope that helps. Thanks for watching.